Hello and welcome to this month's edition of the European Report. Here we are in the European Parliament, in the heart of the European Union, and in today's programme we'll be discussing the rise of Jew hatred across Europe and how Europe needs to get to grips with this pressing issue. And in this programme today I'm joined by Tomas Sandell, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, also Ruth Isaacs, the ECI's Brussels representative, Paulo Casaca, former Portuguese MEP, and Nuno Martins of the European Jewish Congress. Or Nano, sorry. Nuno, to the programme. Tomas, I'll start off with you. The European Coalition of Israel under your leadership has made a very, very strong stance against the rise of Jew hatred ever since your creation over 12 years ago. In your opinion, how bad is the situation that Europe is facing today in terms of addressing the issue of anti-Semitism on this continent?
Well, it's interesting that 15 years ago when we were founded, we had in some way a similar situation. This was the time of the Second Intifada and the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. And today, even as we speak with the recent events in Gaza, we can see a similar reaction, which is quite typical for Europe. When things heat up in the Middle East, we will see the consequences here on the streets in Europe, but not only on the streets in Europe, but also in media, within the political class, where Israel is being treated in a very one-sided way, in a way that no one would even dream of giving the same sort of attention when Palestinians are killed in, say, in Syria, when Christians and other minorities are killed in Iraq and Iran. So there's something very irrational in this huge reaction which we can see. Obviously, one can always say that Israel is a democratic state. We have greater expectations on our friends than on our those who don't share our values. But nevertheless, there's something very troubling with this type of reaction.
And Ruth, what's your impression of what we're seeing today in terms of the rise of Jew hatred right across Europe from each member state? And can you share something about your own country's problem of anti-Semitism, Greece?
Okay. So first of all, just to say that it is across the political spectrum, so you have far right and far left. But then every single country has its own history, and that affects the level of anti-Semitism today. Specifically in Greece, unfortunately, although Greece is a strategic ally to Israel today, you do have historical anti-Semitism, I would say, and it's specifically from previous governments, especially the previous prime ministers from socialist parties that have been educating the public, if you like, in a very negative way towards Jewish people. Certain stereotypes that need to be brought down, and these are the ones that unfortunately they are persistent. And today's problem with the Palestinians is giving rise to some of the same anti-Semitic stereotypes. But it is not about Greece or individual country, it is an international phenomenon, and the international media are playing one of the worst roles that they can play in basically giving propaganda and very biased news regarding Jewish people.
And Paulo, you come originally from the political left. Why are we seeing such a rise of Jew hatred emerging from the far left, which disguises anti-Semitism with
exactly.
anti-Zionism?
I think it was always there. It's not as new as sometimes we could think of. I think in my childhood the issue was already there in the same way, and the problem is exactly as Tomas announced it, that this anti-Semitism pretends to be humanitarian because it shows a lot of compassion for those who are killed, for instance, now in Gaza. The problem is that if we make just looking at Palestinians, and we don't even need to look at nobody else, For instance, after the invasion of Iraq, the way that Palestinians were treated, they were actually the number one, after the Jews, because there were no Jews left in Iraq, they were the number one target of all the extremists. In Baghdad, they were completely wiped out. And they were the only ones that, at the time, the Syrian authorities did not allow in Syria. And it was amazing that for years you had stranded in the desert by the border Palestinians, thousands of Palestinians that were absolutely deprived of any help. And what did the public opinion do about it? Absolutely nothing. I mean, this is the proof that the underlying this movement, it's not a concern for Palestinians. I mean, we had nearly at the same time the reckless bombing of urban areas by the Palestinian refugee urban areas in the periphery of Damascus by the Syrian authorities. Did the public opinion do something about it? I am sure that there were more casualties than there were yesterday in Gaza. But did they do something about it? They did nothing. But they do a lot regarding Gaza. And this, of course, this is fueling the equation from the Hamas leaders, by which it is very profitable to promote suicide, massive suicide, because they couldn't care less with the life of the people, of the Palestinians, and so they are cannon fodder, but they are very profitable because they earn a lot of political dividends in the television. Unfortunately, no television is showing the Palestinians murdered by the Syrian bombings nearly at the same time. And this has to stop. This is a disinformation campaign. I think that the media are the main culprit here, but every rational person has to act and say this has to stop. We should remember that Hitler was already the one making his case through the pretended compassion for Palestinians. It's not coming from now. No, it has been going for ages. And we have to denounce it. Everyone. Not because we are friends of Israel, but because we are friends of humanity, of justice, of truth and peace.
Absolutely. And Nuno, can you thank you for the work that you do here in the European Parliament in raising the issue of anti-Semitism. But can you, as you work on this professionally and raise awareness on this one, what is the extent of this problem that Europe is facing today in terms of Jew hatred?
So we are talking about different layers of anti-Semitism here. Anti-Semitism per se, especially modern anti-Semitism, is not new. It doesn't came out 10 years ago, 15 years ago. You just remember in the early 1980s when the attacks against the synagogue Copernic, and then in the 90s in Argentina. But this comes from the past, the link between terrorism and anti-Semitism. But since 2006 and since the kidnapping of Ilan Halimi in France, it has rising in the way that it became not only violent, but became totally linked to terrorism. What happened was that, especially after the attack in the museum, in the Jewish museum in Brussels, there was still some people trying to avoid to tackle this issue as it should be. And when we start having terrorist attacks, not only against Jews only, but against the civil society in general, linking that and what happened, for instance, in Paris or in Toulouse, that both non-Jews and Jews were attacked in the space of 1 week, that people start linking these two processes. Yeah. The case is that terrorism is a problem not only against the Jews, it's a problem against the civil society. It starts with the Jews, but it goes much beyond that.
Absolutely. And, you know, Tomas, isn't it extraordinary that we're living in such a time where, you know, we've seen so many films about the Holocaust, books about the Holocaust, documentaries made. In terms of education, we've never had so much information presented to us about the dangers of anti-Semitism, particularly with the Holocaust on this continent over 70 years ago. But why, despite that, are we seeing such a rise of anti-Semitism from all quarters, really?
If education could have cured the disease of anti-Semitism, we would be anti-Semitism free today. That is clearly not the case. We also have to remember that the worst expressions of anti-Semitism happened in the most sophisticated culture at the time in Germany, the Germany of Goethe and Beethoven and so on and so forth. So I remember being a guest of European Jewish Congress several years ago, and we were trying to discuss and say, well, what is the core of anti-Semitism? And many were looking at the events of the last 100 years, and I said, well, in your scriptures, I see something happening 2,500 years ago, in the time of Esther and Haman in Persia, where there was a personality, political personality, who had the same obsession with the Jewish people to wipe them out completely. So that would lead me to say that anti-Semitism is something much more complicated and goes much deeper in our psyche than simply just a matter of Islamic extremism or Nazism or any other schism. Which means that we have to be very much, we have to be on our alert today when we see anti-Semitism taking new expressions. And I think sometimes in our liberal societies, it's more difficult to detect anti-Semitism when it doesn't come in the same shape and form as in the past. And in particular, we are blind to the type of anti-Semitism which is regarded as a human rights campaign almost, as Paulo said, humanitarianism. And this is what really concerns me the most, the anti-Semitism which sort of passes through the radar and is so easy to defend as well, because we defend it in the name of human rights. The Israeli army is overreacting. The Jewish people in Europe, they are violating children's rights by circumcision. They are violating animals' rights by kosher slaughter. It all sounds perfectly legitimate, but still, for me, it's down deep inside. It's anti-Semitism.
And Ruth, I mean, you do a lot of great work in terms of raising awareness about Israel and the work of ECI through social media, but social media seems to be a big platform where there's a huge problem now with anti-Semitism. What do you think role that the EU can play in curbing a lot of these posts, whether they're uploaded to Twitter or to Facebook or on YouTube, to counter this virus known as anti-Semitism?
Well, to be fair, the European Commission has a coordinator regarding combating anti-Semitism, and they have been quite firm against hate speech. There is legislation that do try to encourage education about that issue. And the companies themselves, my understanding is, this is what Katarina has told us, that the companies themselves, they have guidelines regarding hate speech. Unfortunately, it's not something that you can monitor 24/7, and there are certain guidelines, but then there are things that, you know, they are anti-Semitic, but they're still trying to argue that it is not. They say it is just criticism. So I'm not sure if it's the companies themselves, and I'm not sure if this is really the solution. The solution is really people understanding what anti-Semitism is about and how it really affects ordinary people's lives, all the way to anti-Semitic attacks and terrorist attacks.
And Paulo, are we seeing a lack of moral leadership on this issue coming from this continent? I mean, historically thinking that this continent was responsible for the death of over 6 million Jewish lives at the hands of the Nazis during World War II, and that involved a lot of collaboration amongst European nations to allow Hitler to actually accomplish that. Should European leaders speak more clearly and louder on this one to stamp it out and to not tolerate this in any level?
Well, absolutely so, but I think that this issue of covering up anti-Semitism with humanitarian concerns is really the crucial one, because this is absolutely not admissible. Actually, what would be the country that would allow an army, even if it would be nominally with no weapons in their hand, to go to the border saying, we want to finish your country and to press the entrance? What would be the country that would not resist the single one? For instance, what was done with a young lady that aggressed an Israeli soldier is absolutely unimaginable. Because I would like to know, what is the army that would allow, in a situation of conflict, whoever to come and to be punched and to do nothing about it? I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous the way that we have been told about the reality. And I think the issue is not the social media. The issue is the core, is the European leaders, and it's the big networks that are actually making the whole of the campaign. Because of course that the uninformed person that knows nothing, sees nothing on the one side, and on the other side just see a lot of smoke, and the impression is that the Israeli forces are the ones that are making the smoke, which is absolutely the reverse, as we know. But whoever just looks at the scenes thinks that it's really a slaughter with bombs, with the will to kill peaceful demonstrators. The culprits are really the elites, the European elites, that allow this message to be conveyed.
We also have to address, don't we, the issue of the implications of anti-Semitism, particularly when we look at the French Jewish community, the Jewish community here in Belgium, and also in Western Europe. There is great fear in being recognised as being Jewish, and we've seen a record number of French Jews making aliyah to Israel. What needs to be done to secure the peace and the safety of the Jewish community? And surely barriers and soldiers with machine guns outside Jewish synagogues or schools is not a long-term solution.
Absolutely, it's absolutely not a long-term solution. It should be a temporary term solution. The thing that people need to understand and to acknowledge that a Jewish citizen is a Jewish citizen. It's as a citizen as anyone else. And the moment, and to pick up what Tomas said, the moment that you put and you see Jews as different from the main society, you are putting Jews aside. And if you are putting Jews aside, then the Jewish community feel fear and they tend to leave. What we are seeing today, however, especially in France, is mutation within the country, which is very interesting because 100 years ago you had mutation within the countries because Jewish communities they got richer, they moved to more bourgeois neighborhoods. Today they are leaving neighborhoods because of anti-Semitism. This is what we see in Sarcelles, for instance, in Paris. So the solution should be that Jews are part of the civil society, and they should be, especially the decision makers, should take that in consideration.
Tomas, we're down to around 6 minutes left of the programme. What do you think the response should be of European leaders, and what policies and policy recommendations that are currently not in place that you'd like to see in place so that Europe can protect and secure its precious Jewish communities from the fear of anti-Semitism?
Well, let me repeat what Ruth said. The European Commission does do commendable work already. Katharina von Schnurbein, who's been on this program, in trying to prevent anti-Semitism. I also want to say it's very good to be on the program together with Nuno, representing the Jewish communities in Europe, and we've been working closely together with the European Jewish Congress over the years to try to be this Christian friend, if you wish, and try to make the point to say that the future of the European Jewry is not only an issue for the Jewish communities themselves. It should be us who are not Jews who should take it on as a matter of decency and justice. But let me get back to correct myself slightly when I said that anti-Semitism education is not necessarily the antidote. I think what we need to get back to is that historical education is so key. When you talk today about the Nakba, 1948, what happened? What's this great catastrophe which are motivating these people to be so angry? Yes, the great catastrophe is not the so-called occupation of 1967. It's the whole notion that a Jewish state was created in the region. And I think international media would have to raise this issue and to say, well, you know, is this a cause enough for so much outrage and violence and hatred? Because I thought the UN partition plan said exactly this. There should be room for a Jewish state in the region. And the second point with the Nakba is very, very, very simple. If the Arab side would have accepted the UN partition plan, today we would have celebrated the 70th anniversary of a Palestinian state, a Palestinian Arab state, alongside an Israeli Jewish state. And these are facts that you can't get around. And so to that extent, I think it's a matter of education, and we should always come back to these talking points because they are so clear. And in the media coverage, which I see in these, they always have an article and then they have facts on the side. And I miss these very basic facts about the conflicts, and we need to come back to them. This is our duty to remind people of what really happened.
Absolutely. And Paulo, I just want to describe something that's happened in the Netherlands recently, that a Holocaust monument in the Netherlands was smeared with blood and mud, and it was engraved with 1,239 Jews who were shipped to their death. How can we continue to allow this to go on and to allow this to happen in our societies? And isn't there a danger that if we don't confront this, then the whole of European civilization is under threat?
I think that we should go to the source, the issue of education, for sure. But if we do not go to the main sources of information, we won't sort out the problem. Because I wouldn't say that the problem is with Facebook or with the Twitter. No, the problem is with the mainstream TV and press, that we just have to look at them. We should study them objectively. I mean, during a full year, how many, for instance, objective, how many Palestinians were murdered and in what circumstances in Syria, for instance, and in Gaza? Well, let's see that. How was it transmitted? You will see 0 on one side and everything on the other. So that's what people look at, and that's what people are informed. They are misinformed. I mean, I actually, in my book in 2008, I described as any of the extreme left sympathizer, I was believing that Israel was evil and was really oppressing the poor Palestinians, and how I came to understand this was not true. And fundamentally, by going there, this is the most important thing, to go there and to see with your own eyes. And this is what the jobs we have to do, and the trouble we have to face in the near future.
And Nuno, in the closing remarks of this programme, as Christians on this programme and representing the Christians across Europe, whether it's from Greece or whether it's from Finland or whether it's from Great Britain, that we just want to say that we stand with Israel and we stand with the Jewish people, and we will not tolerate the rise of anti-Semitism or Jew hatred, and where we see it, we'll confront it. But what role can Christians play in defeating this ancient disease, which is pure evil?
Christians can play a very important role, especially because in many Christian churches, you have the tendency to put Israel on a specific, to see it on a specific way, and to have this tendency of be giving to the other and to see the Palestinian as the other and to help. I saw this in the UK, by the way. But it's the other is also the Jewish brother, because, as someone said one day, the Jews are the older brothers of the Christians. Therefore, there is a continuation. Everybody, we should care about humanity. We should not care just about one against the other. And when you see things like white and black, you are making a division. And we just ask the Christian brothers that everything needs to be seen as a certain perspective, and the Jewish communities would like to reinforce the ties with the Christian brothers and the Christian communities. This is it.
Gentlemen, and Ruth, thank you so much for being my guest on today's European Report. And I just want to thank you for watching today's programme here in the European Parliament, in the heart of the European Union. And we cannot tolerate in any measure the rise of Jew hatred upon this continent. And we all have our individual responsibility to confront and fight it wherever we see it. So thank you for watching today's European Report.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.